The bright lights of the Grand Plaza Hotel ballroom sparkled against the crystal chandeliers as the annual Future Tech Charity Gala got underway. Anyone who was anyone in the tech industry had shown up dressed in their finest, ready to open their checkbooks for a good cause while making valuable connections. Aaliyah Washington pulled her Honda Civic into the valet line, sandwiched between a Bentley and a Rolls-Royce. She adjusted her simple gold earrings and took a deep breath. At 22, she felt out of place at these events, but as the daughter of one of the most successful black entrepreneurs in the country, she'd learned to navigate these spaces. "You can do this," she whispered to herself, smoothing down her navy blue dress. It wasn't designer, but it was elegant. A graduation gift she'd bought herself after finishing Stanford with honors. The valet opened her door with the same courtesy he'd shown to the luxury cars ahead of her, but she didn't miss his slight surprise when her modest car pulled up. Aaliyah handed him the keys with a warm smile. "Enjoy your evening, miss," he said, returning her smile. The Blackwell family arrived just as Aaliyah was walking toward the entrance. Their sleek Maserati purred to a stop, and out stepped Robert Blackwell Sr., his wife Victoria, and their son Robert, Jr., heirs to the Blackwell manufacturing fortune and owners of one of the oldest family businesses in the state. Victoria Blackwell's diamonds caught the light as she adjusted her fur wrap. "Darling, is that the new CEO of Microlink? We should say hello," she said to her husband, nodding toward a man in a tailored tuxedo. Robert Jr., who everyone called Bobby, was busy typing on his phone. At 35, he had his father's height and his mother's sharp features, along with a Harvard MBA and a reputation for being brilliant but difficult. "Bobby, put that away," his father grumbled. "We're here to make connections, not check stock prices." Aaliyah walked ahead of them toward the entrance, her invitation clutched in her hand. She preferred arriving without fanfare. Her father, James Washington, CEO of Horizon Innovations, would be arriving later after finishing an important call with investors in Tokyo. As she approached the check-in table, Bobby Blackwell bumped into her from behind, still distracted by his phone. "Oh, excuse me," Aaliyah said politely, even though he had bumped into her. Bobby barely looked up, then did a double-take. He assessed her with a quick glance from head to toe. "No problem," he said dismissively before turning back to his parents. Aaliyah presented her invitation to the hostess, who checked her name against the guest list. "Ms. Washington,
Welcome to the Future Tech Charity Gala. Your father's table is number 5.
Near the front," the hostess said warmly. The Blackwells were right behind her in line, and Bobby's attention perked up at the mention of her last name. He leaned toward his mother and whispered something, but Aaliyah couldn't make it out. She made her way into the ballroom, decorated in shades of gold and white. The who's who of the tech industry mingled around high tables, champagne flutes in hand. Aaliyah recognized many faces from business magazines and news reports, people her father had done business with over the years. Rather than heading straight to her table, Aaliyah decided to get a drink first. She approached the bar and ordered a sparkling water with lime. "Nothing stronger?" asked a friendly voice beside her. It was Layla Chen, daughter of a family friend and one of the few people Aaliyah actually looked forward to seeing at these events. "I have a presentation to finish reviewing tonight," Aaliyah replied with a smile. "Dad's letting me lead the strategy portion of tomorrow's meeting." "Always the responsible one," Layla teased, ordering herself a glass of champagne. "That's a big meeting tomorrow, right? The Blackwell acquisition?" Aaliyah nodded. "If all goes well, Horizon will be acquiring Blackwell Manufacturing for nearly $500 million. It's been in the works for months." "Speak of the devils," Layla muttered, nodding toward the entrance where the Blackwells were now making a much more noticeable entrance than Aaliyah had. People turned to greet them, and Robert Sr. waved regally like visiting royalty. "Old money," Aaliyah commented. "Dad says they're struggling to modernize their business model. That's why they're willing to sell, but not willing to give up the attitude." "Apparently," Layla said with a raised eyebrow. The two women chatted for a few more minutes before Layla was called away by her parents. Aaliyah, now alone, decided to find her table and check if any of her father's colleagues had arrived yet. As she walked across the ballroom, she felt a tug on her dress. Turning around, she found a server looking embarrassed. "I'm so sorry, miss. My tray caught on your dress," he apologized. "No harm done," Aaliyah assured him, checking that nothing had spilled. From a few feet away, she heard a snicker, Bobby Blackwell was watching the interaction, a smirk on his face. He was standing with his parents and another couple, all holding champagne flutes. "I think the staff is supposed to use the service entrance," Bobby said, loud enough for those around him to hear. Aaliyah froze, realizing he was talking about her. Victoria Blackwell glanced over. "Bobby, hush," she said, but there was amusement in her voice rather than reprimand. "What? I just figured she works here. She drove up in a Honda," Bobby continued, not bothering to lower his voice. "And that dress certainly isn't Versace or Dior." The couple with them laughed uncomfortably, sensing something was off but not wanting to contradict him. Aaliyah stood tall, her heart pounding. She was used to people underestimating her, but it never stopped stinging. She could have walked over and introduced herself properly, revealed that she was the daughter of James Washington, the man about to save their family business from financial ruin. But that wasn't her style. Instead, she turned and continued walking toward her table, her back straight and head held high. "Maybe she borrowed the dress for the night," she heard Victoria Blackwell add with a laugh. "How else would someone like that get an invitation?" The words hit Aaliyah like a physical blow. Someone like that. The implication was crystal clear. She reached table 5 and sat down, taking a sip of her sparkling water to calm herself. The tablecloth provided a moment of cover as she closed her eyes and took a deep breath. Her phone buzzed with a text from her father. "Running 15 minutes late. Tokyo investors asking tough questions. Save me some of those little crab puffs you love." Aaliyah smiled despite herself. Her father, worth billions and running one of the most innovative tech companies in the world, still remembered her favorite hors d'oeuvres from last year's gala. The same father who taught her not to react to ignorance with anger. "Your success will speak louder than any comeback ever could," he always said. As the ballroom filled and the empty chairs at her table were taken by her father's executives and their spouses, Aaliyah engaged in polite conversation. No one at the table questioned her presence or mistook her for staff. These people knew her, had watched her grow up, graduate top of her class, and earn her position at Horizon through hard work and brilliant ideas. "How's the strategy presentation coming along, Aaliyah?" asked Thomas Wong, her father's CFO. "Just finished the final projections this afternoon," she replied. "I think the Blackwells will be impressed with how we plan to integrate their manufacturing capabilities while preserving their brand heritage." "Speaking of the Blackwells," Thomas said quietly, nodding toward the family who were now working the room, shaking hands and laughing too loudly at jokes. "Word is they're desperate for this deal. Their last 3 quarters have been rough." Aaliyah watched as Bobby Blackwell charmed an older investor, all traces of his earlier rudeness gone. "They certainly don't act desperate," she observed. "Pride," Thomas said simply. "Their company has been family-owned for 4 generations. Selling to us is their last resort." The ballroom lights dimmed slightly, signaling that dinner would be served soon. Aaliyah checked her phone again. Her father was 5 minutes out. Across the room, the Blackwells had taken their seats at a table near the stage. Bobby was scanning the room, likely looking for important people to impress. His eyes passed over Aaliyah without recognition. The event host approached the microphone to welcome everyone, and just as he began speaking, James Washington slipped into the seat next to his daughter. "Did I miss anything?" he whispered, giving her shoulder a gentle squeeze. Aaliyah thought about telling him about the Blackwell's comments but decided against it. Tomorrow's meeting was too important to cloud with personal feelings. "Nothing important, Dad," she said with a smile. "Just the usual mix of tech talk and gossip." James nodded toward the Blackwell's table. Our future partners seemed to be enjoying themselves. Aaliyah followed his gaze to where the family was now laughing together, completely unaware that the staff member they had mocked was the daughter of the man about to sign their $500 million lifeline, and the strategist who would be presenting key portions of tomorrow's acquisition plan. "Yes," she said, a small, knowing smile playing on her lips. "I can't wait for tomorrow's meeting. I have a feeling it's going to be very interesting." As the first course was served and the chatter around them grew louder, Aaliyah couldn't help but wonder how the Blackwells would react when they realized their mistake. She wasn't vindictive by nature, but she was human enough to look forward to the moment of recognition. After all, as her father always said, success was the best response to those who underestimated you. And tomorrow, in that boardroom, she would show them exactly how successful she could be. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Horizon Innovations headquarters, casting long shadows across the polished marble floor of the lobby. Aaliyah arrived early, as was her habit, dressed in a crisp charcoal suit that she'd carefully selected the night before. Her hair was pulled back in a neat bun, her laptop bag slung over one shoulder and a coffee in her hand. "Morning, Ms. Washington," called the security guard with a warm smile. "Big day today, huh?" "Morning, Ray," Aaliyah replied, returning his smile. And yes, very big day. She took the elevator to the 40th floor, where Horizon's main conference rooms were located. The executive floor was already buzzing with activity despite the early hour. Assistants hurried back and forth with documents, the legal team huddled in a corner going over last-minute details, and the catering staff was setting up a breakfast spread in the largest conference room. Aaliyah headed straight to her father's office, tapping lightly on the open door. James Washington was standing by the window, phone pressed to his ear, but he waved her in with a smile. "Yes, I understand your concerns," he was saying, his deep voice calm and measured. "But I can assure you this acquisition will only strengthen our position in the market." He paused, listening. "Exactly. We'll talk more next week. Thanks for your support." He ended the call and turned to his daughter. "Nervous?" he asked, noticing how she was fiddling with the handle of her coffee cup. Aaliyah shrugged. "A little. It's a big deal. The biggest we've done yet," James agreed. "But not because of the money. This opens doors to manufacturing capabilities we've needed for years." "I know," Aaliyah said. "I've been studying their production lines. With some modernization and our software integration, we could increase efficiency by at least 30%. James smiled proudly. "That's exactly why you're leading that portion of the presentation. You understand both the technical and human elements better than anyone else on the team." They spent the next 30 minutes reviewing the final details. James was meticulous, wanting everything perfect for the meeting that could change the trajectory of both companies. "The Blackwells have been running their company the same way for generations," he explained. "Change doesn't come easy to them. We need to show them how we'll respect their legacy while bringing them into the future." Aaliyah nodded, thinking about the family's behavior at the gala. She still hadn't mentioned the incident to her father. What would be the point? Business was business, and personal feelings had no place in a $500 million deal. At 8:45, James's assistant knocked on the door. "The Blackwells have arrived, sir. They're being shown to the conference room now." James straightened his tie. "Showtime," he said with a wink to his daughter. They walked together down the hallway toward the conference room, joined by Thomas Wong and several other key executives. Aaliyah felt a flutter of anticipation in her stomach. Not nervousness about the presentation, she knew the material cold, but curiosity about how the Blackwells would react when they saw her. The double doors of the conference room swung open, and James entered first, all warm smiles and firm handshakes. "Robert, Victoria, wonderful to see you again. I trust you enjoyed the gala last night." Robert Blackwell Sr. stood to greet him, his silver hair perfectly coiffed, his handshake confident. "James, always a pleasure." "Yes, excellent event for a worthy cause." Victoria Blackwell air-kissed James on both cheeks, her diamonds catching the light. "Your table seemed to be having a wonderful time." Bobby Blackwell hung back slightly, checking something on his phone before stepping forward to shake James's hand. "Mr. Washington, good to see you," he said smoothly. James turned to introduce his team. "I believe you know Thomas Wong, our CFO, and Patrice Henderson, our legal counsel." Each stepped forward to exchange pleasantries with the Blackwells. "And this," James said with unmistakable pride, "is my daughter and our chief strategy officer, Aaliyah Washington." Aaliyah stepped forward, extending her hand professionally. "It's a pleasure to meet you all," she said, keeping her voice even. The reactions were exactly as she had anticipated. Robert Sr.'s eyes widened slightly, but he recovered quickly, taking her hand with a firm grip. "Ms. Washington, the pleasure is ours." Victoria's perfectly made-up face froze for a split second before she managed a tight smile. "My dear, how lovely to meet you," she said, her voice higher than it had been a moment ago. But it was Bobby's reaction that was the most satisfying. His face drained of color as recognition dawned. His mouth opened slightly, then closed. He stared at her as if seeing a ghost. "Miss Washington," he managed finally, taking her outstretched hand. His palm was clammy. "Mr. Blackwell." Aaliyah replied cordially, giving nothing away in her tone or expression. I believe we were at the same table at the gala last night. It was a small lie, they hadn't been, but it gave him an out. A way to pretend they'd merely been introduced in passing rather than admitting he'd mistaken her for staff and mocked her clothes. Right. Yes, of course, Bobby stammered, relief washing over his face at the offered lifeline. The gala. Lovely event. James, unaware of the undercurrents, gestured for everyone to take their seats. Shall we get started? We have quite a lot to cover today. Aaliyah took her seat across from Bobby, who was now studying his copy of the agenda with intense concentration, avoiding her gaze. Victoria kept glancing between Aaliyah and her son, a worried crease forming between her perfectly plucked eyebrows. The meeting began with James outlining the broad strokes of the acquisition, the price, the timeline, the vision for integrating Blackwell Manufacturing into the Horizon family while maintaining its distinct brand identity. Robert Sr. nodded along, occasionally asking insightful questions about market strategy and leadership structure. And now, James said, after about 40 minutes, I'd like my daughter to walk us through the operational integration plan and projected efficiencies. Aaliyah stood and moved to the front of the room. She connected her laptop to the display, and her carefully designed slides appeared on the screen. For the next 20 minutes, she presented a masterful analysis of how Horizon planned to modernize Blackwell's manufacturing processes while respecting their craftsmanship traditions. Her voice was clear and confident, her knowledge of both companies evident in every point she made. She fielded questions with ease, never hesitating or fumbling for answers. As you can see here, she said, pointing to a graph, by implementing just 3 key changes to the production line, we can increase output by 27% while reducing costs by 15%. And this can be done without any layoffs. In fact, we anticipate hiring an additional 50 workers over the next year as production expands. Robert Sr. leaned forward, genuinely impressed. That's remarkable. Our own analysts suggested we'd need to cut at least 100 jobs to achieve similar savings. Different approach, Aaliyah explained. We're not looking to slash costs through layoffs. We're looking to grow revenue through efficiency and innovation. Throughout her presentation, she maintained absolute professionalism. Not a hint of the previous night's encounter colored her delivery or her responses to questions. But she couldn't help noticing how Bobby shifted uncomfortably in his seat whenever she made eye contact with him, or how Victoria's smile became increasingly strained. When Aaliyah finished and returned to her seat, there was a moment of impressed silence before Robert Sr. spoke. Well, Ms. Washington, that was enlightening. You've clearly done your homework on our operations. Thank you, Mr. Blackwell, Aaliyah replied. Your company has a remarkable legacy. We want to honor that while helping you grow. The meeting continued with presentations from other team members, discussions of legal details, and explorations of potential challenges. As the morning wore on, Bobby seemed to recover some of his composure, even offering a few intelligent comments about market positioning and brand identity. During a short break, as coffee and pastries were being refreshed, Bobby approached Aaliyah while she was refilling her water glass. Ms. Washington, he said quietly, glancing around to make sure they weren't overheard. About last night, Aaliyah looked at him calmly. Yes, Mr. Blackwell? He shifted his weight from one foot to the other. I think there may have been a misunderstanding. If I said anything that came across as inappropriate, I assure you it wasn't intentional. It wasn't exactly an apology, Aaliyah noted, more of an attempt to rewrite history. No harm done, she said simply, her tone neutral. Shall we get back to the meeting? I believe we're discussing the timeline for the public announcement next. Relief washed over his face again. Yes, of course. As they returned to the table, Aaliyah caught her father watching them with a slight frown. He raised an eyebrow questioningly, but she gave a small shake of her head. Not now. The meeting resumed, and by noon most of the major points had been covered. Papers were shuffled, notes compared, and handshakes exchanged. The deal wasn't finalized. There were still some details to iron out, but all signs pointed to a successful conclusion within the week. I think we can call that a productive morning, James said as they wrapped up. Robert, Victoria, we've arranged for lunch to be served in the executive dining room if you'd care to join us. That would be lovely, Victoria said, her social graces firmly back in place now that the business portion was concluded. As everyone gathered their materials and prepared to move to the dining room, Alia noticed one of the security team members slip quietly into the room and approach her father. The man leaned in and whispered something to James, who frowned slightly and nodded. "Is everything all right, Dad?" Alia asked as they walked toward the dining room. James gave her a thoughtful look. "Just something I need to check on after lunch. Nothing to worry about." But Alia couldn't shake the feeling that whatever the security guard had said to her father had something to do with her. She pushed the thought aside as they entered the dining room, where a beautiful spread awaited them. As they took their seats, Victoria made a point of sitting next to Alia. "My dear," she said, her voice honeyed, "I must say your presentation was impressive. Where did you study?" "Stanford," Alia replied. "Computer science and business." "Lovely," Victoria said, nodding as if this confirmed something for her. "And you've been with Horizon for—" "Since I graduated," Alia said. "I started as an analyst and worked my way up." Victoria smiled thinly. "How admirable. It's so important for young people to earn their positions, don't you think? Too many expect things to be handed to them these days." Across the table, Bobby nearly choked on his water. His father gave him a curious look but said nothing. Lunch proceeded with polite conversation about industry trends, mutual acquaintances, and plans for the coming quarter. By all appearances, it was a successful meeting between soon-to-be partners. But Alia couldn't help noticing how her father kept glancing at his watch, or how the security guard appeared again at the door, catching James's eye with a nod. Something was happening behind the scenes. And somehow, Alia suspected it had everything to do with last night's encounter at the gala. Lunch concluded with handshakes and promises to reconvene the following day to iron out the final details of the acquisition. As the Blackwells were escorted to the elevator by Thomas Wong, James touched Alia's elbow gently. "Come to my office," he said quietly. His expression was unreadable, but Alia knew her father well enough to sense something was wrong. She followed him down the corridor, past curious glances from staff who could feel the tension in the air. James closed the door behind them and gestured for her to take a seat. Instead of sitting behind his desk, he took the chair next to hers, something he did only when they needed to talk as father and daughter rather than CEO and chief strategy officer. "What happened at the gala last night?" he asked directly. Alia blinked, surprised by the question. "What do you mean?" James leaned forward slightly. "Security brought me something I think you should see." He reached for his tablet, tapped a few times, and then turned the screen toward her. It was security footage from the gala. The angle showed Alia walking across the ballroom, the server accidentally catching his tray on her dress, and then, clear as day, Bobby Blackwell laughing and making his comment about staff using the service entrance. The audio was muffled by the ambient noise of the gala, but Bobby's words were still audible, as were Victoria's comments about Alia's dress being borrowed. Alia watched in silence, her face carefully neutral despite the flush of embarrassment she felt creeping up her neck. When the clip ended, she looked up at her father. "Why didn't you tell me?" James asked softly. Alia sighed. "What would have been the point? It was just some rich guy being a jerk. Nothing I haven't dealt with before. The point," James said, his voice now carrying an edge, "is that these people are about to become our business partners, and they judged my daughter, who is brilliant, accomplished, and one of the key reasons this company has thrived, based solely on her appearance and the car she drives. Dad." "It's not—" "It is," James interrupted. "It absolutely is a big deal." He stood and paced to the window, looking out at the city skyline. "You know what bothers me most? Not just what they said, but the fact that you felt you couldn't tell me. That you had to just absorb it, process it on your own." Alia stood and joined him at the window. "I didn't want to complicate the deal. This acquisition makes sense for both companies. My feelings shouldn't get in the way of good business." James turned to look at his daughter, his eyes sad but proud. "When I started this company, I had nothing but a good idea and stubborn determination. People like the Blackwells, old money, established names, they looked at me exactly the way they looked at you last night. Like I didn't belong. I know, Dad. You've told me the stories. What I haven't told you," James continued, "is how many times I walked away from deals, good, profitable deals, because I couldn't stomach working with people who couldn't see past their own prejudices." He placed a hand on her shoulder. "This company isn't just built on good tech. It's built on respect. For our customers, our employees, and ourselves." Aaliyah felt a lump forming in her throat. So what are you saying? You want to walk away from a $500 million deal because Bobby Blackwell is a jerk? James smiled slightly. I'm saying I want you to think about whether these are people we want to do business with. The final call is yours. Mine? Aaliyah's eyes widened. Dad, this is your company. And you're its future, he replied simply. Besides, you're the one who did most of the due diligence on this acquisition. You know Blackwell Manufacturing inside and out. If you tell me we should walk away, we walk away. Aaliyah felt the weight of the decision pressing down on her. I need to think about it. Take the rest of the day, James said. We'll talk in the morning before the Blackwells arrive. Aaliyah spent the afternoon in her office reviewing files and financial projections. On paper, the acquisition made perfect sense. Horizon needed manufacturing capabilities to expand their hardware division, and Blackwell needed Horizon's technology and innovation to stay relevant in a rapidly changing market. But now she found herself looking beyond the numbers, examining details she had previously skimmed over. Employee satisfaction scores at Blackwell were consistently below industry average. Their executive team lacked diversity, not a single person of color in senior leadership. Customer complaints about outdated policies had increased year over year. Were these symptoms of a deeper problem? A company culture that resisted change and clung to old ways of thinking. As the afternoon sun cast long shadows across her desk, Aaliyah's phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Layla Chen, her friend from the gala. Heard your meeting with the Blackwells went well. Dinner tonight to celebrate. That new Thai place downtown? Aaliyah smiled and texted back, can't tonight. Rain check? Lots to think about with this deal. Layla's response came quickly. Everything okay? You seemed off at the gala too. Aaliyah hesitated, then called Layla instead of texting back. Sometimes you needed to hear a friend's voice. When Layla answered, Aaliyah found herself spilling the whole story, the comments at the gala, the awkward meeting, her father's surprising decision to let her make the final call. Wow, Layla said when Aaliyah finished. So what are you going to do? I don't know, Aaliyah admitted. Walking away from this deal would be a huge decision. The board would question it. Shareholders might get nervous, and honestly, part of me worries that if I say no, people will think it's just because my feelings were hurt. And what if it is partly because your feelings were hurt? Layla asked. That doesn't make it less valid. Trust is essential in business partnerships. Can you trust people who judged you so quickly and harshly? It was a good question. One Aaliyah had been circling around all afternoon without directly confronting. I need to sleep on it, she said finally. Thanks for listening, Lay. Anytime. And whatever you decide, I've got your back. Across town, in the Blackwell family's penthouse apartment, a similar conversation was taking place, though with a very different tone. How could you be so stupid? Robert Sr. was saying, pacing the living room while his son slumped on the sofa. Do you have any idea what's at stake here? I told you, Dad, I tried to apologize, Bobby protested. She said it was fine. Of course she said it was fine. What else was she going to say in the middle of a business meeting? Victoria snapped, swirling the ice in her cocktail glass. The question is whether she'll tell her father to cancel the deal. Robert Sr. stopped pacing and turned to his wife. You think that's a possibility? Victoria shrugged elegantly. If my son had been insulted that way, I'd certainly consider it. This is ridiculous, Bobby muttered. It was just a misunderstanding. And anyway, they need this deal as much as we do. Robert Sr. laughed bitterly. Is that what you think? Sun Horizon Innovations had 5 other acquisition targets lined up before they approached us. They chose us because we're the best fit, not because they were desperate. He shook his head. Meanwhile, we're 3/4 away from having to start layoffs if this deal falls through. So what do we do? Bobby asked, finally looking worried. Damage control, his father replied grimly. First thing tomorrow, you're going to apologize. Properly this time. No excuses, no misunderstandings, a real apology. And if that doesn't work? Victoria asked quietly. Robert Sr. sighed heavily. Then we'd better start looking for another buyer, quickly. The next morning dawned clear and bright. Aaliyah had slept poorly, her mind racing with pros and cons, scenarios and consequences. By the time her alarm went off, she had made her decision. She dressed carefully in a bold red suit, her power color, and drove to the office earlier than usual. She wanted time to talk with her father before the Blackwells arrived. James was already in his office when she knocked on the door. "Come in," he called, looking up from his computer. Seeing his daughter, he smiled. "You look like a woman who's made up her mind." Aaliyah nodded, taking a seat across from him. "I have. And? I think we should—" She was interrupted by a knock at the door. James's assistant poked her head in. "Sorry to interrupt, but there's something you both need to see." She stepped into the office and handed James a tablet. "The financial team just sent this over. They were doing the final review of Blackwell's books before closing." James frowned as he studied the screen, then passed the tablet to Aaliyah. Her eyes widened as she scrolled through the report. "Are they sure about this?" she asked the assistant. "They triple-checked. It's not a mistake." James nodded grimly. "Thank you, Karen. Please tell the team I'll want to discuss this with them after my meeting with Aaliyah." When the assistant had left, father and daughter looked at each other in silence for a moment. "Well," James said finally, "this certainly changes things." Aaliyah nodded slowly, still processing the information she'd just seen. Hidden in Blackwell Manufacturing's financial statements, carefully obscured but not quite invisible to Horizon's thorough due diligence team, were irregularities that pointed to serious compliance issues. Nothing illegal, perhaps, but definitely questionable. The kind of corner-cutting and rule-bending that could create major liabilities for any company that acquired them. "They must have known we'd find this eventually," Aaliyah said. "Probably hoping we wouldn't discover it until after the deal closed," James replied. "By then it would be our problem." Aaliyah set the tablet down on her father's desk. "So that makes the decision for us, doesn't it?" "Not necessarily," James said, surprising her. "These issues could be addressed post-acquisition. It would be costly and time-consuming, but not impossible." He leaned back in his chair. "The question remains the same. Do you think we should go forward with this deal?" Aaliyah took a deep breath. She had come to the office prepared to give her father one answer. Now, with this new information, she was even more certain of her decision. "No," she said firmly. "I don't think we should." James nodded slowly. "Tell me why." "Two reasons," Aaliyah said. "First, these compliance issues suggest a company culture that's willing to cut corners and hide problems rather than address them openly. That's fundamentally incompatible with how we do business. And second, Aaliyah hesitated, then continued with conviction. "I don't trust them. Not just because of what happened at the gala, but because of how they handled it afterward. Bobby didn't actually apologize. He tried to gaslight me into thinking I'd misunderstood. Victoria was passive-aggressive throughout lunch. Neither of them showed any genuine remorse or self-awareness." She looked her father in the eye. "The Blackwells showed us who they are, both personally and professionally. I think we should believe them." James studied his daughter's face for a long moment, then smiled slowly. "I couldn't agree more." He glanced at his watch. "The Blackwells will be here in 20 minutes expecting to finalize the deal. What are you going to tell them?" Aaliyah asked. James stood and straightened his tie. "The truth, or at least part of it." He gave his daughter a wink. "Care to join me for what promises to be an interesting meeting?" Aaliyah smiled. "I wouldn't miss it for the world." The Blackwells arrived promptly at 9 a.m., all smiles and handshakes as they were escorted to the same conference room as the day before. If they noticed that the mood was different, fewer staff bustling about, no coffee and pastries laid out, they didn't show it. Robert Sr. led the way, his silver hair freshly trimmed, his Italian suit impeccable. Victoria followed, diamonds glinting at her ears and throat despite the early hour. Bobby brought up the rear, looking less confident than his parents but making an effort to appear relaxed. James and Aaliyah were already seated at the table when they entered. Thomas Wong sat beside them, a folder of documents in front of him, his expression carefully neutral. "Good morning," Robert Sr. boomed, extending his hand to James. "Beautiful day to close a deal, isn't it?" James stood and shook his hand firmly. "Robert, Victoria, Bobby, thank you for coming in." His tone was polite but noticeably cooler than the day before. "Please have a seat." The Blackwells exchanged quick glances as they settled into their chairs. Something was off and they could feel it. "I thought we'd have the full team here today," Victoria commented, looking around the nearly empty conference room. "That won't be necessary," James replied evenly. "This won't take long." A heavy silence fell over the room. Bobby shifted uncomfortably in his seat, eyes darting between his father and James. Robert Sr. cleared his throat. "Well then, shall we get to it? I believe we have some final paperwork to sign." James folded his hands on the table in front of him. Actually, Robert, I'm afraid I have some difficult news. After careful consideration, Horizon Innovations has decided not to move forward with the acquisition of Blackwell Manufacturing. The shock was immediate and visible. Robert Sr.'s face flushed red. Victoria's mouth fell open and Bobby froze like a deer in headlights. What? Robert Sr. finally managed, his voice a mix of disbelief and anger. This is outrageous. We have an agreement. We had a preliminary agreement, Thomas corrected gently, subject to final due diligence and board approval, as outlined in Section 7.3 of our letter of intent. Victoria's perfectly manicured hand gripped her husband's arm. James, surely there's been some misunderstanding. Everything was proceeding so well yesterday. James nodded. Yes, it was. Until our financial team completed their final review of your books last night. He slid a document across the table. We found several compliance issues that concern us deeply. Robert Sr. barely glanced at the paper. Minor accounting discrepancies. Every company has them. Nothing that can't be fixed post-acquisition. Perhaps, James acknowledged. But they point to a pattern of behavior that makes us uncomfortable with this partnership. Bobby, who had been silent until now, suddenly leaned forward. This isn't about some bookkeeping issues, he said, looking directly at Aaliyah. This is about what happened at the gala, isn't it? All eyes turned to Aaliyah, who met Bobby's gaze steadily. The decision not to move forward with this acquisition is based on multiple factors, she said calmly, including but not limited to the compliance issues my father mentioned. So that's it? Robert Sr. demanded, his voice rising. You're throwing away a $500 million deal because my son made an inappropriate comment? James's expression hardened. Robert, I suggest you lower your voice. This is still my company's boardroom. Victoria, ever the diplomat, placed a hand on her husband's arm again. James, please. We value this partnership enormously. If there's been any offense taken, she glanced at Aaliyah. We sincerely apologize. Bobby meant no harm. That's right, Bobby jumped in quickly. Ms. Washington, I am truly sorry for my behavior at the gala. It was thoughtless and inappropriate, and I deeply regret it. Aaliyah studied him for a moment. The apology seemed genuine enough now that his family's company was on the line. But it was too little, too late. I appreciate your apology, Mr. Blackwell, she said. But as I mentioned, this decision isn't based solely on personal interactions. It's a business decision. Robert Sr. wasn't ready to give up. James, be reasonable. You know, our companies are perfect for each other. Whatever issues you've found, we can work through them together. James shook his head. I'm sorry, Robert. Our decision is final. The older man's face darkened with anger. You'll regret this. When word gets out that you backed out of a deal this size at the last minute, your stock will take a hit. Investors hate uncertainty. Perhaps, James acknowledged. But they also appreciate integrity and sound judgment, both of which tell us this isn't the right partnership for Horizon. Bobby leaned forward again, desperation now evident in his voice. What if we offered better terms? We could lower the asking price by 10%. His father shot him a furious look, but Bobby continued. 15% even, and we'll address all the compliance issues immediately at our expense. Thomas Wong raised an eyebrow, looking to James and Aaliyah. It was a significant concession, one that would save Horizon tens of millions of dollars. For a brief moment, Aaliyah felt a twinge of doubt. Was she letting personal feelings influence what should be a business decision? $75 million was a lot of money to walk away from. But then she remembered the dismissive look on Bobby's face at the gala, the way Victoria had spoken about her borrowed dress, and the half-hearted non-apology Bobby had offered the day before. More importantly, she thought about the company culture those moments revealed, one that was fundamentally at odds with what Horizon stood for. She gave a small, almost imperceptible shake of her head to her father. James didn't hesitate. I'm afraid that doesn't change our decision. Thomas will provide you with formal written notice later today. He stood, signaling that the meeting was over. We wish you all the best in finding another buyer. Robert Sr. remained seated, his face a mask of barely contained fury. You're making a mistake, James, a very costly mistake. That's a risk I'm willing to take, James replied calmly. Victoria stood, tugging at her husband's arm. Come, Robert. There's nothing more to be done here. Slowly, reluctantly, Robert Sr. got to his feet. This isn't over, he said, his voice low and threatening. James met his gaze evenly. Yes, Robert, it is. The Blackwells gathered their things in tense silence. Bobby, last to leave, paused at the door and turned back to look at Aaliyah one more time. Their eyes met briefly before he turned away and followed his parents out. When the door closed behind them, James, Aaliyah, and Thomas sat in silence for a moment. Well, Thomas said finally, that could have gone better. James chuckled softly, the tension breaking. Actually, I thought it went rather well. No one threw anything. Aaliyah let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Did we just walk away from $500 million? No, her father corrected. We walked away from a partnership that would have cost us far more than money in the long run. He turned to Thomas. How quickly can we approach NextGen about a potential acquisition? Thomas raised an eyebrow. NextGen? The startup with the 3D printing technology? They weren't even on our short list. They should have been, Aaliyah said, sitting up straighter as she caught her father's line of thinking. Their manufacturing approach is more aligned with our sustainability goals, and their corporate culture is excellent. The only reason we didn't consider them seriously was their size. They're much smaller than Blackwell. James nodded. Which means they'd be a riskier acquisition, but potentially a more rewarding one. Especially if we can help them scale quickly. Thomas made a note in his folder. I'll have the team put together a preliminary valuation this afternoon. He stood and headed for the door, then paused. For what it's worth, I think you made the right call. Both of you. After he left, James turned to his daughter. You okay? Aaliyah nodded slowly. Yeah, it was the right decision. I just hope the board sees it that way. They will once we show them the alternatives, James said confidently. And if they don't, he shrugged. Well, that's why I'm the CEO. Sometimes leadership means making unpopular decisions because they're the right ones. Even if it costs the company $75 million? Aaliyah asked, a small smile playing at her lips. Even then, her father confirmed. Besides, money isn't everything. Some things are more important. Like what? Like showing my brilliant, capable daughter that she deserves respect. Not just for her last name or her title, but for who she is and what she brings to the table. He reached across and squeezed her hand. And like building a company that stands for something more than just profit. Aaliyah squeezed back, a lump forming in her throat. Thanks, Dad. The next morning, the business world was buzzing with news of the failed acquisition. As Robert Sr. had predicted, Horizon's stock dipped slightly as investors reacted to the unexpected development. Financial analysts speculated about what had gone wrong, with theories ranging from disagreements over valuation to personality clashes between the leadership teams. Blackwell. Manufacturing's privately held status meant they didn't have to worry about stock prices. But within industry circles, rumors began to spread about their financial stability. Several potential buyers who had previously expressed interest suddenly became harder to reach. In the Washington household, Aaliyah sat at the kitchen island scrolling through news coverage on her tablet while sipping her morning coffee. Anything interesting? James asked as he joined her, pouring himself a cup. Just speculation, Aaliyah replied, though Business Insider seems to have heard something about compliance issues. They're asking for comment, James nodded. Thomas is handling the press. Simple statement, after careful consideration, we determined that the acquisition wasn't in line with our long-term strategic goals. Nothing about the Blackwells personally or the specific issues we found. Taking the high road, Aaliyah observed. Always the best route, her father agreed. Especially since he trailed off as his phone buzzed with a message. He checked it, then smiled. Well, that was fast. What is it? Aaliyah asked. NextGen's CEO just agreed to a preliminary meeting tomorrow morning, James said. Apparently, they're very interested in discussing a potential partnership. Aaliyah raised her coffee mug. To new opportunities, James clinked his mug against hers, and to having the courage to walk away from the wrong ones. As they sat enjoying their coffee, neither of them could have predicted just how successful the NextGen partnership would prove to be. Within 6 months, the acquisition that the business world had initially questioned would be hailed as a masterstroke. With Horizon's stock reaching record highs as their new manufacturing division revolutionized the industry. And as for Blackwell Manufacturing, their deal with a Chinese conglomerate would fall through 2 weeks later, when the same compliance issues Horizon had discovered came to light during due diligence. The company would eventually sell for less than half what Horizon had offered, with most of the staff laid off in the transition. Sometimes, the most expensive mistake isn't the deal you walk away from, but the one you make without fully understanding who you're doing business with. 6 months later, the summer heat had given way to crisp autumn air. Aaliyah stood at the window of her new office, larger than her previous one and with a view that stretched across the city skyline. Below, construction crews were putting the finishing touches on the sign for the new next-gen manufacturing facility, now a division of Horizon Innovations. She smiled as she watched workers carefully position the final panel of the sleek modern logo. The merger had exceeded all expectations, with NextGen's revolutionary 3D printing technology integrating seamlessly into Horizon's product lines. Their first jointly developed product had already secured pre-orders worth over $300 million, and a knock at her door pulled her attention away from the window. "Come in," she called. Layla, Chen entered, grinning widely and carrying 2 cups of coffee. "Thought you might need this." "I heard the board meeting ran long." Aaliyah accepted the coffee gratefully. 3 hours. But worth every minute. She gestured for her friend to sit. "The Q3 numbers are in, and they're even better than projected. The next-gen acquisition is officially being called the deal of the year by the Wall Street Journal. Not bad for a decision that tanked your stock for all of what, 2 days?" Layla laughed. 3, Aaliyah corrected with a smile. "But who's counting?" Layla took a sip of her coffee, studying her friend over the rim of the cup. "You seem different these days, you know." More confident, Aaliyah considered this. "I think I am. Making that call on the Blackwell deal. It changed something for me, standing up for what I believed was right even when it wasn't the easy choice. Your dad must be proud." "He is." Aaliyah nodded, though he's been insufferably smug about it. "I knew you'd make the right decision," he keeps saying, as if he wasn't worried at all about the board's reaction. Layla laughed. "Speaking of the Blackwells, did you see the news this morning?" Aaliyah raised an eyebrow. "No, I've been in meetings since 7 a.m. What happened?" "Their deal with that Chinese company finally closed. But get this, they only got $220 million, less than half what you offered." Aaliyah winced slightly. Despite everything, she didn't take pleasure in the Blackwells' downfall. "That's rough. I heard they had to lay off a lot of people too." 300 employees, Layla confirmed, some who had been with the company for decades. "And the new owners are replacing most of the management team, including Bobby." "I'm sorry for their employees," Aaliyah said sincerely. "That's always the worst part of these deals gone wrong. The people who had nothing to do with the bad decisions suffer the consequences." Layla nodded, then checked her watch. "I should get going. I have a meeting with the marketing team in 10 minutes. She stood and headed for the door, then paused. "Oh, I almost forgot. Your dad asked me to remind you about dinner tonight." "Some kind of celebration?" Aaliyah smiled. "My promotion. Dad's naming me president of Horizon tomorrow." Layla's eyes widened. "Are you serious?" "Aaliyah, that's huge. At your age, you'll be the youngest president of a Fortune 500 company." "One of the youngest," Aaliyah corrected modestly. "And it's mostly ceremonial. Dad's still going to be CEO." "For now," Layla said with a knowing smile. "But we all know where this is heading. Congratulations, friend. You deserve it." She gave Aaliyah a quick hug before hurrying out. Alone again, Aaliyah turned back to the window, watching the workers below as they finished installing the sign. President of Horizon Innovations. It was happening faster than she'd expected. She'd always assumed her father would wait until she was at least 30 before starting the leadership transition. But the next-gen acquisition had changed everything. The board had been so impressed with her handling of the deal that they'd unanimously supported James's proposal to elevate her to president. Her phone buzzed with a text from her father. "Meeting with next-gen team running late. Still on for dinner at 7? She typed back, "Wouldn't miss it." "The usual place?" "Of course. And wear something nice. We're celebrating." Aaliyah smiled to herself. Something nice in her father's vocabulary usually meant dress to impress. She already knew which outfit she'd wear, a deep purple dress she'd bought recently but hadn't had occasion to wear yet. That evening, Aaliyah pulled her Honda Civic, the same one she'd driven to the fateful gala 6 months ago, into the parking lot of La Maison, an upscale French restaurant that had been her father's favorite for years. She'd offered to meet him there rather than have him pick her up, wanting a few minutes to herself to process the day. As she handed her keys to the valet, a sleek black Maserati pulled up behind her. Aaliyah froze, recognizing the car immediately. Bobby Blackwell stepped out, handing his keys to another valet. He was alone and dressed in an expensive suit, though it hung a bit loosely on his frame as if he'd lost weight recently. For a moment it seemed like he might not notice her, but then he turned and their eyes met. Time seemed to slow as they stood there, the memory of their last encounter hanging in the air between them. Aaliyah saw recognition flash across his face, followed by something that looked like shame. She could have walked away, ignored him completely. Part of her wanted to, but instead she gave him a small, civil nod of acknowledgement. Bobby hesitated, then walked toward her, stopping at a respectful distance. "Ms. Washington," he said, his voice quieter than she remembered. "I didn't expect to see you here." "Mr. Blackwell," she replied evenly. An awkward silence stretched between them. "I heard about your promotion," he said finally. "Congratulations." Aaliyah tilted her head, slightly surprised. "Thank you. How did you hear about that? It hasn't been announced yet." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "The business world runs on gossip, as I'm sure you know." The smile faded. "You deserve it. What you did with NextGen was impressive." Another silence, less awkward this time, but heavy with unspoken words. "I heard about your company's sale," Aaliyah said carefully. "I'm sorry it didn't work out as well as you'd hoped." Bobby's expression tightened momentarily, then relaxed into resignation. "It is what it is. We made our choices." He paused, then added, "Some worse than others." The raw honesty in his voice caught her off guard. "How are your parents handling it?" she asked, surprising herself with the question. Bobby ran a hand through his hair, a nervous gesture she hadn't seen from him before. "Dad's taking it hard. His grandfather started that company, you know? 4 generations ended on his watch." He shrugged. "Mom's more practical, already planning their next move. And you?" He met her eyes directly for the first time. "I've been doing a lot of thinking about choices, consequences, the kind of person I want to be." He took a deep breath. "I never properly apologized to you, Ms. Washington, not really. What I said that night at the gala, how I behaved, there's no excuse for it. I was wrong and I'm truly sorry." The apology seemed genuine, not motivated by a business deal or parental pressure, but by actual reflection. "Thank you," Aaliyah said simply. "I appreciate that." Bobby nodded, looking relieved. "Well, I should let you go. I'm sure you're meeting someone." "My father," Aaliyah confirmed. "We're celebrating." "Of course." Bobby took a step back. "Enjoy your evening, Ms. Washington." "You too, Mr. Blackwell." As he walked away toward the restaurant entrance, Aaliyah found herself calling after him. "Bobby?" He turned, surprise evident on his face at her use of his nickname. "Everyone deserves a second chance," she said. "Not necessarily with the same people, but in life." A genuine smile spread across his face, not the polished, confident smirk she remembered, but something more humble and real. "Thank you. I hope to earn mine." With a final nod, he disappeared into the restaurant. Aaliyah stood there for a moment, processing the unexpected encounter. There was something satisfying about it, not in a vindictive way, but in the sense of a story coming full circle. Her phone buzzed with a text from her father. "Inside at our usual table. They've opened the champagne." Taking a deep breath of the cool evening air, Aaliyah smoothed down her purple dress and headed toward the entrance. As she walked, she couldn't help but reflect on how much had changed in 6 months, not just for her career, but for her understanding of herself. The night of the gala, she had absorbed the Blackwells' dismissive comments with quiet dignity, pushing down her hurt and anger for the sake of business. It was something she'd done many times before, choosing professionalism over confrontation, compromise over conflict. But in the boardroom that fateful morning, when she'd shaken her head at her father, declining the Blackwells' last-minute offer despite the millions of dollars at stake, she had chosen something different: integrity over expediency, respect over profit, and that choice, seemingly risky at the time, had led to greater success than anyone could have predicted. Inside the restaurant, James Washington stood as his daughter approached the table, his face lighting up with pride. Several other people were seated with him: Horizon's board chair, the former CEO of NextGen, and a few key team members who had made the acquisition a success. "There she is," James announced, raising his champagne glass. "The woman of the hour." As Aaliyah took her seat amidst warm greetings and congratulations, she caught sight of Bobby Blackwell across the restaurant, sitting alone at the bar, nursing what looked like a whiskey. Their eyes met briefly, and he raised his glass slightly in a subtle toast. Aaliyah nodded in acknowledgement before turning her attention back to her father, who was beginning a toast of his own. "To my daughter," James said, his voice rich with emotion, "who taught us all that the best business decisions aren't just about numbers on a spreadsheet, but about values, integrity, and seeing people for who they truly are." "To Aaliyah," the others echoed, raising their glasses. As the evening progressed, filled with good food, laughter, and plans for the future, Aaliyah felt a deep sense of contentment settle over her. The path forward wasn't always clear, and difficult decisions would always need to be made. But she knew now without a doubt that she had the courage to make them. And sometimes, standing up for yourself and your values didn't just feel right. It led to outcomes better than you could have imagined. Not just for business, but for life.